I hope you had a good week this week. I'm telling you, I am glad it's Sunday and the sun is out and it's a new week. Because this last week for me was challenging. I said in first service, I was going to say it was a crappy week, but it's Sunday and that doesn't sound like a good Sunday word. So I'm not going to say crappy. I'm going to say challenging instead of crappy, but now I've said it like a total of 6 times. And so if that word bothers you, it's elders.graceandauburn.com, and we'll put it on the agenda for our next meeting to discuss its Sunday worthiness. So this last week, I didn't tell first hour what happened. I'll tell you guys what happened just briefly. So Tuesday, our house gets broken into. Yeah, it could have been worse. But we came home to a smashed-in kitchen slider door, and things were missing. And but it could have been much worse. And so we're getting through that, and we've got the plywood, the nice plywood sliding door. We went from glass sliding door to plywood sliding door. It's not the same. It's classy, though. And then on Friday, I was out riding my bike, which I do every day. It's my stress reliever. It's my exercise. And I was halfway through my bike ride, and it was rainy. And I'm headed down off the top of Hollywood Hill in Woodinville, and I saw a truck coming my way, and I just kind of went to move to the very outside of my lane to avoid him coming down this thing, and the bike just went out from under me, and I crashed and got to hang out with some paramedics in the back of an ambulance for a while, and my doctor said, you're going to do what on Sunday? Speak standing? No, you can't do that. I'm like, it's not a can, I'm just doing it. So this last week, probably as you draw it up without other people getting hurt that I love, I got saturated with enough for this last week. And I don't know how you get when you have a season like that, or you go through a week where just everything seems to be going wrong for you. We get frustrated and angry and sad, and those are all normal and healthy emotions to go through. Then we start to question, God, where are you in this? Why did you let this happen? And I do that for like a second. God, why did you let this happen? Then I go right to, what did I do, God, that you smote me with with this stuff this week? And what do I need to do to make it up to you? That's how I think. But the reality is, it's just life, And it could have been a lot worse. Both things could have been much, much worse. I could be in the hospital with more than broken ribs, We could have been home when somebody broke into our house. God was involved in the details of what was happening in our lives this week, and we'll look at that a little bit more as it relates to the rest of us as we get through here today. But we've been talking for the last several weeks about defining moments. We've been looking at the defining moments of people from the Bible and their encounters with Jesus and how their lives were changed. Each of us, we all experience defining moments in our lives. We're in a season of transition in the life of this church. We're in a defining moment, a defining season in the life of our church. And these defining moments that we've been talking about, they have a way of altering the trajectory of our lives, sometimes for the better and sometimes, I think always for the better, but sometimes immediately for the better and sometimes immediately, it seems, for the worse. A lot of the trajectory has to do with how we respond to the defining moments that we face in our lives, how we handle those moments. Did you all get your newsletter this week, by the way? And I know you all read it, right, from cover to cover. I put one of the single most defining moments of my life on the cover of the newsletter. Did you read it? Yeah. So my last first kiss is a defining moment in my life. And if you didn't read it, I'll just, spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you about it right now. My wife and I were dating in college, and she had actually broken up with me. And then we went to a Minnesota Twins game, kind of by chance with some friends, and that was the night that she realized, how could I ever have let this guy go? He's so phenomenal. She was in first service. She's not here now, so I can say this kind of thing. And so I actually caught a Kirby Puckett home run ball at that game, and instead of keeping it, which I really, really, really wanted to do, I gave it to a 7-year-old kid sitting behind me in order to impress Kara, which must have worked because we ended up hanging out back at school that night. And after a long talk about life and future, I made my move and went over and kissed her, and like Bobby Brady from the Brady Bunch, man, I saw fireworks and skyrockets like when he kissed Millicent or whatever her name was, you know. Kara did not see the fireworks. She got up, walked over to the nearest garbage can, and threw up the hot dog I bought for her at the game. It's not the way you draw it up, man, when you go in for your first kiss. You just don't think that's how it's going to work out, right? So she left this morning. She's like, would you please stop telling people about this? It's so old. I'm like, yeah, it's old for us because it happened 23 years ago, but these guys don't know about it. It's an opportunity for me to tell more stories. So that was a cool defining moment. It's a great story. The single most defining moment, though, in my life happened a few years earlier. When I was 17 years old, I was living with my father, and he was dealing cocaine, and he became so indebted to the person he was working for that he just left in the middle of the night one night, and I woke up to a note saying, I'll be in touch. And after that, I dropped out of high school, and I got recruited by the same people to sell cocaine in what was a higher-end cocaine distribution operation, we'll call it. And while I was in the midst of that, my uncle from Chicago called me, and he said, hey, Todd, I just want to let you know that your grandfather is sick. He's dying. He's got cancer, and he only has a few weeks, maybe a couple of months to live. I don't know what you're going to do with that information. I just wanted to let you know. My grandfather had been a huge influence in my life growing up when I was a young kid. And so I felt compelled to go to Chicago. So I flew to Chicago, and I went to my grandfather's house, and it was kind of a day like this. It was a late September day in Chicago. It was warm and sunny, and I got to my grandfather's house, and I got to the door, and I realized, and I thought to myself, what am I doing here? I have no idea what I'm going to say to my grandfather. I can't talk about, I'm certainly not going to tell him what I'm doing or how I'm doing. But yet I knew I had to be there, so I knocked on the door, I went in, and my grandfather and I sat in his dark bedroom with the shades pulled, and we drank milkshakes together because that was the only thing that he could get down at that point. And I'm looking at the shell of the person I used to know, and I didn't know what to say, and I knew I wasn't going to start the conversation, so we sat there in an awkward silence for a few minutes, and my grandfather broke the silence with his tears. He put his hand on my knee, and he just began to weep and repeat the words, Todd, I'm so sorry. Todd, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what's going on in your life. And he didn't know. He didn't have all the details, but he could take one look at me, this kid that he had known for 17 plus years, and realize I was living on the ragged edge, and it broke his heart. And he forgot about his pain. He looked past his own pain, and he wept over my pain. That was the most profound Jesus moment I've ever had in my life, because my grandfather became Jesus for me in that moment. You know, when Jesus went to the cross, he looked past that pain, and he looked into time. He saw you, he saw me, and he hoped that we would understand what he was doing. He was doing for us. And my grandfather became Jesus in that moment when he wept over my pain, and knowing he was going to die just 6 weeks later. Without that defining moment in my life, none of the other defining moments would have happened the way they did. I wouldn't have had that kiss story with Kara, wouldn't have had the marriage story, defining moment with Kara, that wouldn't have experienced the defining moments of Gracie and Sophie without that moment with my grandfather. That was the single most defining moment in my life, and I'll never forget it. So those are the kind of defining moments we're looking at in Scripture over the next several weeks. People who had similar encounters with God, more profound encounters even. There's a guy in the Old Testament that we don't hear a whole lot about. You may have heard about him in Sunday school. He was called Namaan. And Namaan was a guy who was desperate for a defining moment in his life, the type of encounter that would change the trajectory of his life for the better, a type of encounter that would cause him to experience the relentlessly tender love of Jesus. And again, we only see just one snapshot of Naaman's life in 2 Kings 5. And Jesus mentions Naaman in Luke 4:27, which just gives greater weight and significance to Naaman's story. Naaman's story is such a great one because it's a story that's saturated with the themes of salvation and redemption. And those are themes that matter deeply to God. Rescuing people and redeeming us from our brokenness are at the they're central themes to God's story, and they are at the very core of the heart of Jesus. So 2 Kings 5:1 says, "The king of Aram had high admiration for Naaman, the commander of his army, because through him the Lord had given Aram great victories. But though Naaman was a mighty warrior, he suffered from leprosy." So Naaman was the high commander of this powerful army of King Ben-Hadad II, which is now modern-day Syria, which is in all kinds of trouble these days. But Naaman is this revered warrior, a highly decorated general. He's second in command in the entire country behind the king. He's like the prime minister of the land. Yet this larger-than-life figure, this great warrior general, has a very serious problem. He's suffering from leprosy. Now, Naaman is no stranger to big moments in life. He had faced many moments, life and death moments on the battlefield. He was well acquainted with the sweet taste of victory. Naaman had never met a challenge or an obstacle that he couldn't get over or through or around in some way in order to find victory. Failure and defeat had not been part of Naaman's life experience, but now he's losing for the very first time, and he's losing big. He's losing the battle for his very life. And underneath that armor and all the decorations of a general, Naaman's body is literally rotting away. And what we can take from Naaman's situation here is that none of us, no matter our status, our perceived status, or our accomplishments in life, none of us in this world is exempt from the adversity and pain that life throws at us again and again and again. None of us is exempt. Leprosy is an automatic death sentence for Naaman. There's no cure for the disease, and there's nothing that anybody can do to fight off this brutal disease's progression. If you were to get leprosy, it would start with maybe a spot on your skin that would spread. Oftentimes it starts in your extremities. You might cut yourself and not know it. You might, after a while, you begin to lose not only sensation, but your extremities just fall off, and your body just begins to decay over time systematically until you die. Leviticus 13, a chapter in the Old Testament, shows us what the Jewish people would do if leprosy may have come upon a person. So if somebody was thought to have leprosy, if they had a little spot on their skin that could have been leprosy, or a white hair and a little spot, they would be sent to the priest. The priest would then quarantine them for 7 days. They have to go just be alone for 7 days away from everybody else. And after that 7-day quarantine period, they would come back to the priest, and the priest would re-examine them. And either the priest would give them a clean bill of health and they could rejoin society, or the priest would see that this is spread and it's most likely leprosy. And in that event, the person would be banished outside the city walls to be alone or to live with other people who suffered from leprosy. So not only were you given a death sentence by this disease, you were a social, religious, and societal outcast, forced to live on the outside of the city. And when people approached you, you had to live with the shame of being required by law to call out to people, "I'm unclean, I'm unclean." You know, in other words, "I have leprosy, don't come near me, don't touch me." Imagine living out your days with a brutal disease in which you also had to carry that type of shame. So Naaman here is facing desperate circumstances in his life. He's facing circumstances he is powerless to do anything about. How many of us know what it's like to face circumstances we feel absolutely powerless to do anything about? Some of us are there right now. There were a couple days this week, I can tell you, when I was sliding across the asphalt on Friday, I felt a very strong sense of powerlessness. When I got home and saw that our house had been broken in, there was a sense of powerlessness. Naaman had a much more profound sense of powerlessness as he's facing the end of his life. And what he didn't know is that he needed supernatural intervention, which is exactly what many of us in this room desperately need today. Supernatural intervention. We're facing issues in our life that we are seemingly, if not totally, powerless to control. We're facing illnesses, addictions, anxiety, fear, uncertainty about the future. Fill in your own blank. We all know the things in our life that we're dealing with, and we are desperate for, whether we have admitted it to ourselves or to anybody else, we are desperate for a defining encounter with the relentlessly tender love of Jesus that alters the trajectory of our life in the way God longs to alter it. Maybe you're saying, hey, no, Todd, you know what? I'm awesome. Things in my life are great, man. You had a bad week. I'm sorry about that, but things in my life are great. If that's true, I am excited for you. And I would say, be thankful. But if you're saying that, I would also say, look a little deeper. Look a little deeper beneath the surface of things being awesome and get honest with yourself and see where it is that you may need some divine intervention. I think it's amazing how much you and I have in common with a Syrian general who suffered from leprosy thousands and thousands of years ago. The thing with Naaman is that he'd been suffering or facing a death sentence long before he ever presented with the symptoms of leprosy. As a Syrian general, he may have known about the God of Israel, but he doesn't know the God of Israel. And it wasn't just Naaman's body that's rotting away as a result. His soul is also dying a slow and agonizing death. And Naaman's illness leads him to a place he never would have gone to if not for his suffering. It leads him to a place that he desperately needed to go, that he never would have arrived at if not for his suffering. The same is true with our pain. Our pain often leads us to places in our relationship with God and in life that we never would have visited if not for the pain. And we come out of the other side stronger and better for it, especially when God's involved. 2 Kings 5:1 tells us that God was the one, or the Lord was the one that gave Naaman great victories, which I think is very cool because it reveals something about the heart of God. It reveals that God cares for more people than just those who call themselves Christians or followers of Jesus. God cares for those who don't yet know him. And I'm really encouraged by that because the circle of people that we hang out with up in Woodinville, most of them, we have a lot of friends from 20 years of living here that go to church, but most of the people that we spend most of our time with don't know Jesus and wouldn't be caught dead in a church. And yet, God, I'm hoping and praying and trusting that he's working in their life like he did in Naaman's life to bring them to a place where he can reveal himself to them just as he reveals himself to Naaman. God gave Naaman those victories to bring him to this point in his life where God could intervene and save Naaman's life, but more importantly, God could intervene and save Naaman's soul. And whether you and I are aware of it or not, God's been working through the circumstances of our lives to get us to this place in our life, to get us to today, to get us to this moment, maybe even in this room so that he can alter the course, alter the trajectory of our life for the better on his terms. Our soul, as we sit in here today, may be in a similar condition as Naaman's soul was. He may be dying a slow, agonizing death, just withering away. Even as followers of Jesus, that may be the case. Our faith, and as a result, our soul may be on absolute life support as we sit here, because it has been a very long time since we've allowed the relentlessly tender love of Jesus that pursues us, to capture our heart, to capture our soul, to capture our lives. And yet, even though we sit here with our souls on life support, we project an image to ourselves, and we project an image to those around us that everything is fine. We're living the life of the good Christian. But there's no such thing as a good Christian, and everything in our life is not fine. Underneath, we're afraid, we're uncertain, we're troubled. We've got all, we know what we're dealing with. But here's the great thing. Here's the really good news. In this moment, as we sit here, God offers you and I the very thing he's about to offer Naaman here in 2 Kings 5. He offers us healing where we need it, hope, purpose, and redemption, especially for the failures and the regrets and the self-recrimination so many of us carry around like dead weight, like heavy anchors that just go with us everywhere, reminding us of how much we've blown it, how terrible we are, how far from God we must remain because we're not good enough. God redeems, takes it away from us, forgives us. 2 Kings 5, verse 2. Now a group of Aramean raiders had invaded the land of Israel, and among their captives was a young girl who had been given to Naaman's wife as a maid. One day the girl said to her mistress, "I wish my master would go see the prophet in Samaria. He would heal him of his leprosy." So Naaman told the king what the young girl from Israel had said. "Go and visit the prophet," the king told him. "I will send a letter of introduction for you to carry to the king of Israel." So go to the king and get cured. I'll send a letter. I love that. So Naaman started out taking as gifts 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. I like that he was quite the clothes horse, Naaman. So he brings 10 sets of clothing. I like that the Bible includes that kind of stuff. The letter to the king of Israel said, "With this letter I present my servant Naaman. I want you to heal him of his leprosy. Thank you very much." Signed, the king Ben-Hadad II. So somebody told me, a resident economist here at Grace told me in between services that 750 pounds of silver in today's market would fetch $50 million. And 150 pounds of gold would fetch $3 million. So Naaman is headed to Israel with $53 million in gold and silver and 10 sets of clothing, by the way. So as he goes into Israel, though, Naaman would have been considered an enemy, which might be why he brought so much money. He would certainly have been considered an enemy by those who lived along Israel's northern border with Aram or with Syria, because Aramean bandits were known, they were notorious for making predatory incursions into Israel. They would come in, they would steal livestock, valuables, even people, then jump back into their country and sell those things to their countrymen, sell the livestock, sell the valuables, and sell the people. So there was a young girl who had been taken captive in one of these incursions, and she ended up somehow in Naaman's household. And not only that, she ends up as a trusted servant to Naaman's wife. And apparently Naaman and his wife were good people, because this young girl who had been taken captive grows to love Naaman and his wife. And though she's essentially their slave, she's become part of their family. And she tells Naaman's wife that there's a prophet in Israel that can heal Naaman of leprosy if only Naaman would make the trip to go see the prophet Elisha. So Naaman is suffering, and the only option that he's given for any hope is this prophet. So he's going to go. So he heads to Israel with his $53 million worth of gold and silver and his 10 sets of clothing, so that he can pay for his cure. And Naaman goes to King Joram, who was one of the worst kings in the history of Israel, one of the most ungodly kings to sit on the throne, and gives him the letter. Joram, because he's an ungodly king in part, and because he was just Joram, he doesn't know what to do. He freaks out by this whole thing. When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes in dismay and said, "This man sends me a leper to heal? Am I God that I can give life and take it away? I can see that he's just trying to pick a fight with me." That's what he thought. He thought this is all about an invasion that's about to happen. But when Elisha, the man of God, heard about the king's reaction, he sent this message to him. It was pretty much this message. "What is your deal, man? What's wrong with you?" He says, "Why are you so upset? Send Naaman to me, and he will learn that there is a true prophet here in Israel, because you, king, don't know anything about the God we serve." God was aware of Naaman's condition. And again, he brought Naaman to this point to meet his deepest needs. And as you and I sit in here this morning, God is just as aware of our condition and our circumstances. Psalm 37 says that God knows about the details of our life. He cares about the details of our lives. And even when we stumble, he won't let us fall, because he holds us by the right hand, by his mighty right hand. And he longs to meet our deepest needs, no matter who we are, no matter who we are not, no matter what we've done, no matter what we've neglected to do. In this moment, the relentlessly tender love, the forgiveness, the hope, the life that only Jesus can offer is pursuing you. Will we let it, what's pursuing me, will we let it capture us? Just let that linger for a second, that the greatest love the world has ever known is pursuing you relentlessly as you sit here. Just let that linger. Let that sit with you. Verse 9. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and waited at Elisha's house. But Elisha sent a messenger out to him with this message: "Go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. Then your skin will be restored and you will be healed of leprosy." Good news. It's worth the trip. Everything Naaman dreamed is about to happen, right? Maybe not. Verse 11, but Naaman became angry and stalked away. We're going to heal you of your leprosy. Just go get in the river and get out and you'll be restored. No. Naaman said, I don't think so. He stalked away. And then he says this: I thought he would surely come out to meet me, he said. I expected him to wave his hand over the leprosy and call on the name of the Lord his God and heal me. Then he's like, why the heck did I make this trip in the first place? Aren't the Abana River and the Pharpar River of Damascus better than all the rivers of Israel put together? I think so, Why shouldn't I wash in them and be healed? So Naaman turned and went away in a rage. What a powder, man. Naaman has offered exactly what he hoped to receive by going to Israel: healing of leprosy, a death sentence of a disease, and the miracle of both physical healing and spiritual healing are right in front of him to grasp, and Naaman rejects Elisha's offer because Elisha didn't meet Naaman on his terms, and Naaman's pride won't let him accept Elisha's terms, or bigger still, God's terms for how this healing would go down. So, pride's a nasty thing. We know that. Our pride has a way of derailing us almost every time, and it almost derails Naaman here. It is absolutely tragic when we miss the things that Jesus offers us freely because we've placed our own expectations, our own way for things to happen on Jesus, and our pride won't let us surrender to receive the things that we desperately need on Jesus' terms, and that is so tragic when that happens. So Naaman leaves Elisha's house in a rage. He's fully intent on taking his leprosy-ravaged body back to Syria, where he will die a slow, agonizing, and decaying type of death. Naaman may have been dying from this devastating disease, but his pride is thriving. His pride is fully alive, fully well. And Naaman's angry. He's angry because Elisha wouldn't come out to meet him, to greet him personally as the king had done. Well, the king wasn't following the law. Elisha was following the law. Elisha wasn't disrespecting Naaman by not coming out to meet him. Elisha was doing what he had to do in order for Naaman to experience his healing. If Elijah had gone out to meet Naaman, he would have become unclean, spiritually and ceremonially unclean. And this healing couldn't have taken place. Elijah needed to follow the law. He needed to stay at a distance from Naaman and his leprosy. But Naaman, not being an Israelite, didn't understand that. You got to love Naaman's response, right? Doesn't he know who I am? I am second in the land of Aram only to King Ben-Hadad II. I am the prime minister. I am a decorated, victorious warrior who could wipe this country out if I wanted to. Doesn't he realize that? Does he not know who he's dealing with? I just wanted him to come out. I wanted him to wave his magic wand over my leprosy. I'd pay him the $53 million and we'd be done with our transaction. That's it. What's this guy's deal? How often have you and I missed opportunities because we've had that same attitude? Don't they know who I am? Don't they know what I deserve? I've had that attitude. Hey, don't you know who I am? I'm Todd. My wife vomited the first time I kissed her, man. Come on. Show me a little respect. Or sympathy or whatever needs to be shown in that situation. Naaman just wanted to get his business transaction over with, but this wasn't a business transaction. This was to be a transformation of body and soul for Naaman. And it could only be done on God's terms. And God's terms are not the easiest terms. And at first blush, they don't always appear to be the best terms, but they are always the best terms. Naaman wanted a healing ceremony. He didn't want a mud bath in a river in a foreign country that he thought was inferior to the rivers in his own country. He was a revered general. He didn't expect some prophet that wouldn't even come out to say hello to ask him to jump through hoops in order to get healed. Apparently and insanely, Naaman would rather die than humble himself and find healing on God's terms. And we can see ourselves in Naaman's behavior, right? We often, even when it comes, and often especially when it comes to our relationship with God, we want things done our way. We're used to getting our way, or we always want our way. And so we want things the way we want them. We want things on our terms. And so how often do we cry out to God for help only to place our terms and our expectations on how He'll help us? God, this is what I need you to do for me, and this is how I need you to do it. It's the only way, and really it's not the only way, it's the only way we'll accept. It's the only way, God, I need you to do it. And then God says, no, I've got different terms. And we bristle, and we push back, and we miss the opportunity that God has for us. But God loves us, and because He does, He brings us back. He cycles us through back to the same place. It's kind of rinse and repeat until we get to the place where we'll surrender to the point where we're willing to say, okay, God, it doesn't have to be on my terms. It can be on your terms. I trust you. Fortunately, Naaman's entourage helps Naaman get to this place. They show some courage. In verse 13, it says, but his officers tried to reason with him and said, Sir, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, wouldn't you have done it? So you should certainly obey him when he says simply to go and wash and be cured. So Naaman went down to the Jordan River and dipped himself 7 times, as the man of God had instructed him. Can you imagine being Naaman? You know, you take off all your general stuff, you know, all that weight, and you walk down toward the muddy river, and you look at your guys, and you go, all right, I'll do it. And you get in, you dip yourself once, and you come up, nothing. Twice, nothing. 4 times, 5 times, nothing. The 6th time, I'm starting to freak out a little bit if I'm Naaman. You go down 6 times, you come back up, the leprosy's still there. You look at your guys and you go, I don't know. He goes down a 7th time. He comes up. And verse 14 said, and his flesh became as healthy as a young child's, and he was healed on that 7th time. His guys convinced him that he was being unreasonable, which is putting it mildly. His guys convinced him that he was being like a petulant little baby and that he needed to go and do what Elijah told him to do. And fortunately for Naaman, he changes his course and he finds the healing that he so desperately needed. And Naaman's healing, by the way, had nothing to do with the water in the Jordan River. It had everything to do with God's outrageous mercy being poured out on Naaman's life. That same outrageous mercy that God wants to pour out on your life and on mine. Naaman's healing ultimately had everything to do with Naaman's willingness to surrender his pride, to submit himself to God's terms, and to do what the prophet Elijah asked him to do. Go in, not once, not 5 times, but 7 times. 7 faith-filled acts of obedience to find healing. And it worked out pretty good for Naaman, didn't it? Verse 15, then Naaman and his entire party went back to find the man of God. They stood before him, and Naaman said, I know at last that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. Naaman now has been transformed. His body's been transformed, and his soul has been healed. He puts his faith in God. He worships God because now he's encountered the one true living God. But Naaman doesn't yet fully understand the profound grace that's healed him. Naaman still wants to pay Elisha the $53 million because he feels indebted to Elisha. He feels indebted to God for this healing that's taken place. He still feels like he has to pay for, somehow earn his healing in his salvation. But that's not how it works with God. God's mercy and God's healing and God's forgiveness, they're all offered freely to anyone who will accept them, anyone who will receive it. But what we see in Naaman, we so often see in ourselves. There are so many of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus that have a transactional relationship with God. We have a transactional view of God. God, I will do this, this, and this for you, and then I hope and expect that you'll do this, this, and this for me. Deal, God? No deal. Because God doesn't work with us that way. He doesn't relate to us that way. God's not a God that requires us to have more good deeds, have our good deeds outweigh our bad deeds in order for him to love us and bless us. Some of us feel like we're at a distance from God and we have to stay there because we can't approach him because we've blown it so much and so often. And we can't approach God, we think, until we've done something so that our good deeds outweigh all the things that we've done poorly, all our failures and all of our sin, because we have that transactional view of our relationship with God. But it's a one-sided view. God does not have a transactional view of us. He doesn't have a transactional relationship with us. He's got a forgiveness relationship with us. Jesus already did whatever you are trying to do, he's done it for you. You don't have to do it. You're forgiven, you're loved, you're redeemed, you're restored. You can have purpose. The transactional relationship with God entirely misses the profound grace of God. It entirely minimizes the sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross when we view God with that through that transactional lens. Naaman had that transactional thing going on, and it says in verse 16, but Elisha replied, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept any gifts, because it would minimize what happened here. And though Naaman urged him to take the gifts, Elisha refused. God didn't want Naaman's money. God wanted Naaman's life. God wanted Naaman's soul. And God wants the same thing from us. And so the last verse says, go in peace, Elisha says. And Naaman goes in peace. It was a peace unlike any he had ever known before in his life. And so he started home again, it says. So I wonder, as we wrap up this morning, how many of us need the healing emotionally, spiritually, physically, relationally that Naaman experienced in his body, that God gave Naaman? How many of us need to experience the peace that Naaman left that place with? A peace that we're so desperate for, a peace we've never experienced in a relationship with Jesus, a peace that we haven't experienced in quite some time as followers of Jesus. Some of us, as we sit here, we truly are suffering, and we're suffering in silence. We're sitting in emotional pain. We're sitting here acutely aware of our brokenness, of our sin, of our failure, of our distance from God. We sit here in our anxiety and our fear and our uncertainty and our depression, and it seems that God is silent, that he's unaware, unaffected, and uninvolved in our circumstances. He is totally aware, completely affected, and absolutely involved in our circumstances. And his posture towards you and towards me today is one of open arms and love that says, I am pursuing you. Just let me capture you. Let me capture you with my love. Let me capture you with the peace that you so desperately long for. Let me begin the healing process in your life. Some of us need to stop fighting for our own way and surrender. And some of us need to stop beating ourselves up and surrender to that love that pursues us. We can leave here right now, unaffected, go watch the end of the Seahawks game. They better be winning. Or we can leave this place a little more like Naaman left Elisha, having had a profound encounter with the living God and having experienced the peace that our souls have been desperate for quite some time. I'm going to pray and wrap up our gathering, but as I pray, some leaders are going to come forward, elders and pastors, and we're just going to be here at the front. If you've got stuff going on in your life, if you're suffering in silence, if you are living with anxiety, if you are experiencing brokenness in any way in your life, and you just need somebody to pray with, somebody to plead for you to God, we would be privileged, honored to do that. That's why we're here. So just make your way forward. Don't worry about what anybody else does or doesn't do. If that's what you need, we want to pray for you, okay? Let me pray. God, thank you for the story of Namaan. Thank you that this story teaches us so much about who you are, who you love, who you pursue. And it also reveals a lot about ourselves. God, maybe a lot of us in here have that, or have had that, or at times have that transactional relationship with you. That one that says we have to do good things so God will do good things for us and not do bad things so that God won't punish us. And as a result, God, we've been at a distance from you, and we need to close. We are so desperate for the gap to be closed between you and us. We are so desperate to be captured by your love. So let us do what we need to do this morning. If it's just having somebody pray for us, if it's doing business with you on our own, whatever it is, God, before we move on to the next thing, help us to do what you want us to do, what you've asked us to do, what you desperately want for us, and help us to surrender to your terms, God. Help us to surrender to your terms for this church as well. In Jesus' name, amen.